Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Prashanthi Raman, Senior Director, Global Government Affairs, Cruise. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Grayson. Great to be here.
I'm happy to have you here because Cruise is an awesome company that's developing the future, and without policy, the future cannot be developed. So I can't wait to dive into this conversation.
Looking forward to it.
From the private sector to the public sector and back, you've had one interesting journey. You've worn lots of interesting hats. What have you learned during this journey?
Thanks for the question. I think for the most part, most of us are all striving to make life better for those around us. So whether it's through my time in government, working to expand healthcare, through Medicaid, or through tech and transportation mission-based companies like Lyft and Cruise, people do genuinely want to leave the world better than what it has been. I think that's pretty remarkable and something too often forgotten in controversial discussions, or when there are, on occasion, bad actors with bad motivations. You saw that even in the pandemic when business halted to a stop, the public and private sector have to react to the same crisis, taking care of their employees or constituents and keeping people safe. And so I think we all generally have the same goals. We just come at it from different lenses.
Was it something in your background that you just decided that you wanted to do good by society and make the world a better place?
I think that's ultimately what's been built from the teachings from my mother. In Sanskrit, there's a word called seva, which means service. And ultimately, what my mom had taught me throughout my childhood is, it doesn't matter how much money you make, it doesn't matter what title you have, it is really the character of who you are and how you've given back. And so that's something that I have strived to thread throughout my professional career, something I hope to teach to my children as well, because it's true. If we aren't able to give back to everyone else and have people rely on us, that ultimately is my purpose in my life.
Your mother had a strong positive influence on you. Characters are everything. Without character, you have nothing. It's the same thing with your word. You give your word, you honor your word. You're a good character or a bad character. There's no middle ground on it. Was that your mom's like, do right and be good and honor your word?
Absolutely. I can recall many an instance where I tried to, how we say, skirt the rules of the book. She kept me in check much of my childhood life. And to her, honor, reputation, people being able to trust you is something that you need to hold sacred. That is something that I really carry with me, even in my career. I'm in government affairs. That is something that I choose to continue to push as my forward value in all of my conversations. I want people to be able to trust me, and I bring them honesty, directness, which is always my strength and weakness, as I say, and also just a lot of transparency.
Trust makes the world go round. Without trust, there's no autonomous vehicle industry. You're not going to trust this to go there. There's no banking system without trust. Everything, going to the grocery store, you trust that the food is going to be healthy and it's not going to be expired. You trust to have a good experience when you go to Disney World. If you look at all these different things that individuals can relate to around the world, it's trust. And when you go into a hospital or doctor's office, you trust that individual will give you the best health care for whatever need you might be there. You've got this deep background in healthcare law and policy. Healthcare is a very interesting industry, a complex industry. I don't understand the nuances like you do. I understand I go to the doctor, I want to feel better. That's about as far as what I know. With this background in healthcare law and policy, how do you look at autonomous vehicles? Are you looking at it from an implication, well, if this happened, then this is what's going to trigger, or if that happened, this is what's going to trigger?
It's a great question. I know I have a lot of experience in very policy-focused environments where the regulatory structures are dynamic between states, localities, federal, all of the jurisdictions. Healthcare is a highly regulated environment, but even there, we are constantly innovating and iterating. We think about discussions around Medicaid, single payer systems, retail health clinics, the vaccinations as of recent. Laws and regulations are complicated and complex and also have extremely arcane rules that need to be updated. Autonomous vehicles are part of a nascent industry, but transportation has been around for centuries. So there's an opportunity here to change some of those archaic laws and regulations to allow for burgeoning industry without it being over prescriptive or onerous, and understand that it will continue to evolve just like all industries, including healthcare. For me, I think my passion has really been around access. It was access in the healthcare setting, it's access in the transportation setting. And so I think for me, that has been something that I have carried with me in both of these interesting industries.
The access of autonomous vehicles, you can say it's the glue or the pipe that connects it. If an individual can take like a cruise vehicle to go to a better doctor or to go to a specialist, for example, where transit's not running, that's going to be an interesting opportunity. The one that I think a lot about is healthcare administered in an autonomous vehicle, where if some individual's having a heart attack or something is not right, they can say, okay, vehicle, not feeling well, take me to hospital. Think about all the lives that can be saved. When do you think we get to a point where we'll start to see healthcare services in an autonomous vehicle that could have a profound positive effect on somebody's life by saving their life?
I love the enthusiasm about all the potential places for this technology to go, particularly when we know this technology is life-changing and life-saving. While we are at the point where we're just transferring transportation as we know it, we have to get the small stuff right first. And that's why Cruise is so rigorous in its focus on safely driving on the streets of San Francisco. It's the only way we can ultimately deploy at scale. And as you know, Grayson, we have a pilot program launched in Phoenix in partnership with Walmart, but we're working on impact. And we have looked at how we can impact where we are right now. And so that's why we're working on providing meals and groceries to start in San Francisco to those who need it the most during this trying time of the pandemic. We launched the Cruise for Good partnership last April, and to date have delivered over 1.6 million meals and groceries to individuals all over the 7x7. Those that need it the most and those that are most affected by COVID. I'd say that's pretty impactful of what we're doing at present, and we'll only continue to look at ways we can serve in the future by our commitment to Pledge 1%, which is committing at least 1% of our fleet to social impact in communities. And we will do so as we continue to scale. So while it's not healthcare services administered right now in autonomous vehicles, we actually used a public health crisis and are still able to impact individuals in a really significant way.
Well, reading between the lines on that, I have a feeling that healthcare will be available at some point in the near future in your vehicles. With 1.6 million meals being delivered, what are the reactions when the vehicles roll up? Is it a positive reaction? Is it a happy reaction? Is it a thankful reaction? Is it, wow, this is an autonomous vehicle and I have food? What are those reactions like?
I think they run the gamut, but they are largely positive. From the autonomous vehicle trained operators who help deliver the meals and groceries and help load them up from SF Marin Food Bank or SF New Deal, to those who are receiving them, it is largely positive because there is a lot of gratitude in this time right now. Those who are able to actually deliver the meals and see the positivity and graciousness and appreciation from those who are receiving it, as well as those who are actually hungry and want that food and want the meals and groceries for themselves and their families. It has been also interesting to see how the technology can bridge some of these underserved areas of transportation, as well as those who have not been really available to technological services the last multiple decades. And so I think that's really interesting to be able to bridge that digital divide that so often exists. So I know that, autonomous vehicles and particularly cruise cars come up in orange and white with the huge sensor suite at the top. This is definitely a conversation point.
Have any children come out to ask questions to the safety operator? What's this? How does that work? How do I become an engineer? Are there any of those stories that have occurred?
No, I haven't heard about any of those anecdotes from the delivery space, but I have seen them when cruise cars are at different events in and around town. Children are very curious. They are very interested in saying, well, what does that do? What's a LiDAR? Is it laser? Can you see it? Does it glow in the dark? What do you mean a radar can track the speed of an object coming at it? So can they see me riding my bike? Those kinds of questions you often see, and it's really precious, but it's also really interesting to see how their brains work and how they are absorbing the information. And maybe one day, as my daughter says, she wants to build an electric flying car. So it really does keep their energy and their curiosity growing, which I love.
As a child of the 80s, and it's a glow in the dark. Oh, can we play laser tag with that? Is there a way? Like, there's all those. That's where I go, like fun things. Or can I get around that and I could win the game? California has a notorious regulatory environment. You're doing good by society, delivering food to those who are in need. Did you have to jump through any regulatory hurdles or get special permitting processes or anything of that to be able to do this?
How much time do you have, Grayson?
I have plenty of time.
I think we know this technology will save lives, help the planet. It's why we've been rigorously focused on safely deploying in San Francisco. And that rigorous approach to safe and responsible deployment is one we take seriously, as do the regulatory bodies here in Cruise and I know other AV companies have to work through a pretty complex regulatory and permitting process, particularly the case in California, which is unique in its structure. It has both the California Department of Motor Vehicles as well as the California Public Utilities Commission as a dual regulator system for a ride-sharing capacity. It is the CPUC, which oversees the passenger transport aspect, and the DMV that looks at the operations and registration of those vehicles on the road. So not only are our vehicles learning faster in the tough driving environment that San Francisco provides, but we're doing the hard work now in California, one of the more complex regulatory environments in the US, as you've just said. And I think that puts us in an even better position to scale. So we've gone through a series and sequences of permitting, anywhere from driver pilots from both the DMV and then the CPUC, and then the driverless pilots from the DMV and the CPUC. Cruise is the only company so far to receive a permit from the California Public Utilities Commission for autonomous testing with members of the public in the vehicle without charging a fare. We're presently hopefully awaiting our DMV deployment permit receipt. And I think that's a huge step forward towards our commercialization efforts. It's one of two that are required to fully launch a passenger service. And so it's also an opportunity to engage our hometown San Francisco community to ensure we're delivering that world-class product and experience that they will be proud of. The CPUC has an unprecedented process for its deployment permit in the transportation space, in that it requires a public process to actually receive the approval. So we know that we'll be working together with a lot of stakeholders, community organizations, government agencies in and around the state of California and San Francisco to receive that permit.
From a policy perspective, what has to be done in order to charge fares? Is that another agency that you have to go through and get approval? So you got to have your three agencies. Okay, check, check, check. And will that allow you to, or is there something more complex than that?
The DMV deployment permit, once it's received, you can actually deliver goods for a fare or a charge. And with the CPUC, you have to first receive your DMV deployment permit and then subsequently go through this public process. It's called a Tier 3 advice letter process. After you receive that permit, you can then charge a fare for the transport of passengers under that deployment permit. But those rules are actually fairly new. They came out in November of 2020. The CPUC came out with a decision then that actually allowed the industry to be able to charge fares in the realm of passenger transport. So from a policy perspective, it is actually really new and is something that I have and was working on since I got to Cruise.
The Tier 3 advice letter process, are there guidelines on how long that takes? Have they made any public statements around that?
We understand that it has traditionally been used by the utilities world. That has been, when we look at some of the Tier 3 advice letter processes that are all on public forums, and you can look at that, it is actually fairly lengthy. It is upwards of an average of 160 days. There's an ability to halt the process and then restart it. That is something that we continue to look at as an industry, where we are eager and ready to deploy our technology, but also want to be great collaborators with the regulatory bodies that oversee us and to understand that there's a process in which they are ensuring to the public and to ensure that they're doing things in a safe and deliberate way in a very nascent industry. But it is something that we look at in terms of how long it will take to be able to do so under this process. And there have been comments that have been filed accordingly in the CPUC process by many AV industry companies, as well as trade associations, really hoping that the traditional way that this process has been used in terms of its long amount of time and long amount of days won't necessarily be the same for the AV industry. But this is unprecedented. Hopefully, Cruise is the first to apply for that deep deployment permit, but we'll also be the first company then at that point to have gone through it in this way.
What you described as a complex situation, and I wrote a blog post, I got a lot of pushback on it, and I said that policymakers, individuals that work on policy, are the rock stars of autonomy. You have to go through a complex regulatory process, because without that, the engineers could build the world's greatest widget, and if they don't have the policy, they can't deploy it. And so I have to give a shout out to yourself and our mutual friend Rob Grant for all the incredible work on the policy front, because without policy team that actually understands policy, you don't have a business. And you've got a great CEO in Dan Alman who says, we're going to run a business. But without a great policy team, you have nothing.
I'm going to take you to every single internal meeting that I have and allow you to showcase the immense work and importance of what government affairs does. So I very much appreciate it. And I know Rob does as well.
I want to take a step backwards. It's not like you showed up at Cruise one day and said, hello, Mr. Grant, I'm going to be a policy person. I understand this from healthcare. You were the head of the state and local government relations. That was during complex times, multiple issues on the state level, some down to city and county levels, the whole curb debates. What did you learn during that time at Lyft, looking at multiple states, multiple jurisdictions, that you're bringing that experience to Cruise? Said, I already went through that. I figured that roadmap out.
Absolutely. I was there for 5.5 years. And as you said, Grayson, I saw it all from building the frameworks across the country to a lot of more of those granular issues. And so I learned how to be nimble in a regulatory landscape that is still under formation. And I also learned how education to consumers, elected stakeholders is critical to its success, because they haven't quite had the experience of an autonomous vehicle before, similar to those who had never used a TNC app to request a ride. A lot of those earlier conversations were, what is an app? How do I see I can request a ride? What does that look like? Or frankly, a lot of my elected conversations is, I think my daughter or son told me about that. But I think the thing I am most focused on every day to day is how Cruise can launch its vehicles safely and responsible. We talked about it being in San Francisco to start, and especially how we bring communities along with us in the process. So I think we've seen technology and transportation companies evolve over the course of time, including my previous company, and of course here at Cruise. And I suspect we will continue to do so. But I also think that's why the space is so exciting, because it has the ability to change how we can get around and our lives for the better in a very significant way, and pretty much turn on our heads how we get from places from A to B. I think the Cruise's desire is to launch into ride sharing in a fleet managed approach that is more accessible and affordable to more people. And we want to do so in a more sustainable way than any other AV company. So really excited about bringing what I've learned from the TNC world into the autonomous world, into the future of transportation.
During your time there, I served in a political appointee role. And the one thing that I learned a lot about was the dial ride. And especially with elderly individuals, that they didn't know how to use the app, and then Lyft had to develop the dial ride. It was just one of those things that we never really thought about, but now when we're in AV, we're like, oh, we can figure that out. We can help those individuals that want to get to the senior center or want to go visit their grandkids. We've talked a lot about San Francisco, and I'm going to ask, from a business perspective, why San Francisco? Kyle wrote the blog post, but it was 2 years ago on Medium, about the love of San Francisco. But from a business perspective, why San Francisco is the launch market?
Cities are hard places to learn to drive. I think you and I probably can both say that. Having driven around some of the more complicated areas. I mean, I'm from Chicago. That's not an easy place to drive either. But it's why we've remained so focused on developing our technology in San Francisco. We've started in one of the hardest places rather than the other way around. So we're proud to be a San Francisco company, as Kyle shared in that blog post, and where we've grown and developed, and where the overwhelming majority of our on the road testing happens today. And I think we're focused on launching with and not at communities. So engaging with the cities we aim to serve, the people that live, work, and play in them is essential to our success. We're proud members of that community and want to be good stewards of our cities that our employees call home, including myself. That's why we talked about the Pledge 1% program. It's why we talked about the Cruise for Good and our meal delivery process. And I think if we can get it right here, we can get it right in many places. And so if we're able to kind of tackle the hard problem first, we're going to be able to scale in a way that's faster and safer for all.
As a proud San Francisco company, and me being a baseball fan, when the San Francisco Giants win the World Series next time, will there be Cruise vehicles in the parade since it's a great hometown team? Cruise is a great hometown company. Will they come together to celebrate that?
I hope so. I think that there's always an opportunity for us to integrate into our communities and to the successes of the city. Willie Mays was actually in our recent Poppy video, and so we do have a connection straight with the Giants and an amazing human like Willie Mays. We are constantly looking for ways to engage and integrate ourselves into communities because, as I said, we're not trying to launch at them, we're trying to launch with them because we cannot actually be successful without everyone else.
The Seike kid was one of the most phenomenal outfielders to ever play baseball. The way that he could run and track down a ball, I mean, he had a gift. He truly, truly had a gift, an incredible baseball player that's gone on and done remarkable things after his playing career. What is the vision for the San Francisco launch? The Poppy video is well done. How will it benefit consumers in the San Francisco community? And what happens if a tourist comes in? There's the old, the Rice-A-Roni song, a San Francisco treat, and people ride in the trolley car and they want that iconic photo. Will this be the next thing with Cruise? Oh, I want the Cruise photo. I came to San Francisco. I rode the trolley, got that check. Now I want to ride the Cruise vehicle and get the photo.
I love the imagination, and I hope that we can sort of use some of those ideas as we look to how deployment happens here in San Francisco. But I think Cruise really wants to do it the right way with a methodical approach. We talked about deploying with communities, not at them. And so I think we fully believe that over time, our services will be more accessible, affordable, and user-friendly for more people. But we have to start out in that really measured approach. And that's why we are testing all over but the 7x7. It's why we started to driverless test in certain areas of San Francisco. And while we'll continue to take that deliberate approach when we come into San Francisco from a deployment set, it's also why we continue to have conversations in and around San Francisco as to who we can partner up with and how we can start to have some of those deployment partners be a part of us. Is it talking to some hospitals, talking to the hospitality industry, talking to some areas that are in need of transportation in all hours of the day. And so it's not a means of trying to supplant mass transit by any means. It's actually a way to complement them to areas that are underserved by potentially those transportation options, or in ways in which there aren't as many options at certain times of day.
Will the Origin be deployed in San Francisco?
That's the plan, that we expect to start our initial passenger service in our Chevy Bolt vehicles, which is the platform used for our current testing efforts. So we're really excited about bringing the Origin to San Francisco. That, of course, needs to occur through some of the caps, the conversations in Congress, and some of the NHTSA petitions that we don't need to talk about in too much detail today, but that is a conversation that we're hoping to have. But it is our every intention to bring the Origins to San Francisco.
The Origins will work in San Francisco. I like the way that they're designed where you can replace the parts and keep the frame. It was really well done from a design perspective where it could be durable in use. So your engineering team did a really great job. But I want to go back to one of my favorite topics again. We're going to go back to policy. You were recently stating to Engadget about the SB 500 bill that will require all light-duty autonomous vehicles that operate in California zero emissions. So you stated the following. The AV industry is primed to lead the way in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in cities, and it's why we've operated an all-electric zero-emissions fleet from the start. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, thanks. Cruise is leading the AV industry, and now the AV industry is leading transportation. And so we're looking forward to expanding these other places because Cruise knows a sustainable transportation future is essential to combating climate change. We're building the future of transportation, and we need to do it so in a more sustainable way. Cruise has been all electric from the beginning because of that. And we strongly believe that all AVs should be, which is why we were so supportive in leading that SB 500. Cruise led the coalition with other industry partners, scientific and environmental leaders, and labor unions in support of SB 500, which is the legislation that was recently signed into law by Governor Newsom, requiring all new light duty AVs to be zero emission by 2030. We know that transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in California, accounting for 40% of the state's total emissions. And so to also move policy in a way that it is meaningful and is also aligned with not only the governor's goals, but also the president of the United States goals, we actually think that real innovation is zero emission. And that's why we were so supportive in leading the way there.
Does that decision go back to when the Audi A4 in the early days was pushed to the side and the all-electric came in? Was that where that decision goes back to those early founding days? And it was Kyle. I remember Matt Gipple was your attorney at that time. Like going way back to the old days. Was that when that decision was made?
It happened right from the start. Safety is, of course, Cruise's top priority, but sustainability is largely built into the fabric of Cruise from its beginning. It's why we've taken also a holistic approach to sustainability from our all-electric fleet to vehicles today and into the future, developing the infrastructure needed to charge them, the legislative efforts we've just been talking about that ensure the AV industry as a whole is a leader in a more sustainable transportation future. We know that transportation is the highest source of emissions. And so that's why we're so committed to reducing those emissions. Our entire AV fleet is 100% electric. It will continue to be. In 2019, Cruise became the first and to date only autonomous vehicle company to power our fleet with 100% renewable energy in California. We've talked about recently announcing our Farm to Fleet initiative to purchase renewable energy credits directly from the Central Valley, charging Cruise's AVs with solar power captured by solar panels at family-owned farms in California. It not only helps reduce those emissions, it also creates real pathways for farmers to generate sustainable revenue from AV adoption just by owning solar panels. So we firmly believe that safety and sustainability are both essential to being good citizens of the communities we operate in. And we continue to look in really creative ways in order to move that sustainable needle forward.
The Central Valley farming for solar is becoming a trend now. Your Cruise leading the way, cruising ahead, no pun intended. And other companies are starting to follow that. And that's going to be an interesting trend as more companies start to follow that strategy. You highlighted infrastructure, and I always think like, okay, we're going to plug these things in. They have to go somewhere to sleep to get charged. What is Cruise's EV charging strategy? Are there any policy implications there? Or is it just the engineers are figuring this out from a technical standpoint?
Well, that's also the case, but Cruise is also investing heavily in electric charging infrastructure, and this will scale as we grow. So we're proud to have joined in coalition, like I was talked about, with the electrical worker unions in California in support of all AVs being EVs. We believe that expanding EV charging can be a job-creating effort in our state, while also being, of course, the right thing to do from a sustainability perspective. In San Francisco, we're hoping to build one of the largest charging stations in North America, stimulating an area that has been traditionally underserved and underutilized with jobs and activities for local merchants, but doing so in a clean way. It's also why we did the Farm to Fleet and announced that Farm to Fleet initiative. We actually do believe that it's more from a policy lens, but also from an operational infrastructure and, of course, as you stated, an engineering way.
From a supply chain perspective, we're reading stories. The Financial Times has done an incredible job covering the mineral supply chain as it relates to electric vehicles. What is Cruise doing to ensure that the company has enough precious metals and resources for the EV batteries? As you get a customer and says, okay, we're deploying, we're going to ramp up the origin and let's go. Oh, we don't have enough materials for our batteries. What's the company doing to avoid that scenario?
As you know, our current test vehicles are manufactured by GM. It's amazing to have a very large OEM as our partner, along with Honda. And the Origin will be as well manufactured by GM right here in the United States. It'll operate on GM's Ultium battery, which will be the world's first million-mile battery. And so when you layer in the fact that Cruise powers its fleet with 100% renewable energy, Origin can sit up to 6, you really start to get a sense of its impact in changing the future of transportation. So we're proud to work with GM and our partners at Honda to develop our technology and vehicles. And we will continue to utilize their expertise in manufacturing power as we scale up. So we know that they are on top of the supply chain resources. We will continue to work on supporting them.
Your OEM relationships are one of your strategic advantages because your OEM partners in Honda GM, they know how to manufacture vehicles, great vehicles, and they know how to do it at scale. Mm-hmm. That's the key, scale. So that's a big advantage. After the million miles are up, battery says, boop, boop, I'm done. Do those batteries go off to be recycled?
Yeah, so we're proud to work with our partners at GM and their EV-focused goals as we push to decarbonize transportation. I think we're focused on a range from Cruise's perspective on all aspects of sustainability. So from charging infrastructure, the electricity that powers those charges, the legislative advocacy. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that effort and efforts and ways to continue that sustainability in all aspects of charging.
From a holistic perspective, what is Cruise's overall ESG strategy? You touched on very important elements, but what is the overall strategy?
I think from us, it's just that holistic approach to sustainability. It's looking at our all-electric fleet to vehicles today, figuring out infrastructure needed to charge them, understanding what the policy efforts are. So, for example, legislation like SB 500, is it going to be replicated in other markets across the country in order to really ensure that AV industry as a whole is a leader in a more sustainable transportation future? Really working in ways in which we are renewable, using 100% renewable energy in California. Are we able to do so in other markets? And so really taking what we're doing in California and adopting that in multiple markets that we look to do so in is something that we continue to look at. And that allows us at Cruise to firmly believe that safety and sustainability are both essential. And so how do we continue to move that needle forward in ways in which we can expand and scale moving forward? So hopefully that answers the strategy question.
There's a clear desire. This is not a PowerPoint presentation. Knowing several of your executives are incredible men and women, it's real. It's not just checking a box. I want to point that out to the listeners. It is very real. It's not baloney dust. Putting this entire conversation into context, we touched a lot and interacting with the communities and building with the communities, the ESG strategy, getting ready for a eventual San Francisco deployment. What is the future of Cruise?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I think Cruise will continue to scale our social impact programs as we grow. So we talked about Pledge 1%, we talked about our delivery of our meal program, which, by the way, is offsetting more than 80 metric tons of CO2 emissions that would have been emitted by gas-powered cars. Cedar funder programs like Human Made, which is providing financial and in-kind support since its inception to ensure that workforce development programs continue to serve and train local residents. FutureWorks participation, which is focused on STEM education and economic mobility. We know that succeeding in the autonomous vehicle space is as much as a trust race as it is a tech race, something we talked about at the beginning of our conversation. And Cruise is engaging wherever, whenever we can to build that trust and show ourselves to be engaged and constructive partners. I think the winners of the AV race will be those that have successfully navigated the complex regulatory framework, particularly in California, as we discussed, and be constructive partners in developing, and then are able to produce vehicles at scale, which you talked about with our two OEMs who have expertise in that for decades and sometimes centuries together. And perhaps, and we've talked about this as well, most importantly, earning that consumer trust. I firmly believe that Cruise is the only company with the right funding, partnership, strategies in place. And I'm really excited to see what the next few months will bring here.
I want to point out you have an individual, and Dan Emmett as your CEO, who says this is not a science project, this is a business. And that goes a long way. You've got me on the sidelines, a lot of individuals that, okay, this gentleman gets it because he understands without profitability, without revenue, there is no business. And Prashanthi, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, we covered a lot of ground. We learned a lot about Cruise. What would you like our listeners to take away from this discussion?
I hope that listeners are excited about the future of AVs like you and I. I hope they get involved in discussions from a policy standpoint with their state elected officials and their representatives in Congress. The United States needs to lead on AV technology. If we don't step it up soon, then other countries will get to write the rules of the road and putting American workers and consumers at a disadvantage. So we really need to heed that call and ensure that we're having the appropriate conversations that we can with all those voices that are in the decision-making rooms. I hope that when listeners hear about Cruise, or maybe see one of our vehicles testing in San Francisco or in Arizona, that they understand how focused we are on safety, as well as the forward-thinking, holistic approach our company takes to sustainability. And we talked about this before, but we know that real innovation is zero emission. That's the mantra that Cruise is proving out every day. And so I hope that that is what listeners take away from our conversation today.
As Prashanthi said, the United States does need to lead on autonomous vehicle policy. We can't farm it out and like, oh, we have to play catch up. No, this is not on the Cruise side, but look what's happening at the ports. Autonomy could play a big part of shoring up the supply chain. Autonomy is going to create jobs, and electric autonomy will be good for the environment. It's good for our kids, and it will create a lot of jobs. And the United States has to lead on this very important technology, and we can't just let it pass by because two adults can't go in the room and have a conversation. And on that note, if you don't agree with somebody, have a conversation. You might learn something. Just be respectful. Be kind to one another because you can learn something. And the United States has to lead on this policy. It's not a matter of Republicans or Democrats. It's a matter of doing what's right for society. And as we heard today, the future is bright, the future is autonomous, and the future is sustainable autonomous transportation. Prashanthi, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.